My husband's ex-wife showed up at our door claiming that she had his baby, then his double life started unraveling and now he is begging for reconciliation. I, 28F, have been married to Jake, 32M, for 3 years, and until 2 months ago, I thought I was living a fairy tale. We met through mutual friends at a charity fundraiser for children's cancer research 5 years ago. I was volunteering at the registration desk when he walked in wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit, his green eyes sparkling as he smiled at me. There was something magnetic about him that drew everyone in, not just his looks, but his charm and the way he made everyone feel special. That night, we talked for hours about our dreams, our careers, our hopes for the future. He was different from any man I'd ever met, successful but humble, ambitious but kind. When he asked for my number at the end of the night, my hands were shaking so much I could barely type it into his phone. Everything seemed perfect, like the universe had finally decided it was my turn to be happy. That is, until 2 months ago, when his ex-wife Sarah showed up at our door with a baby that looked exactly like him. I remember that day with painful clarity. It was burned into my memory like a brand. It was a Sunday afternoon in October, crisp and bright, the kind of perfect fall day that makes you grateful to be alive. Jake and I were preparing dinner together like we always did on Sundays. He was making his famous chicken marsala, the same dish he'd cooked for me on our first date, and I was chopping vegetables for a salad. We had just bought our dream house 6 months ago, a beautiful Victorian with a wraparound porch and a garden I was slowly bringing back to life. The mortgage was steep, but Jake had gotten a big promotion at work, and we both agreed it was worth stretching our budget for our forever home. Everything felt complete, like all the puzzle pieces of my life had finally clicked into place. The doorbell rang, its chime echoing through our high-ceilinged foyer. Since Jake was handling raw chicken, I went to answer it, wiping my hands on my apron, the cute one he'd gotten me for Christmas with Kiss the Cook embroidered in red script. Standing there was a woman holding a baby who couldn't have been more than 6 months old. Before I could say anything, she asked, "Is Jake home?" There was something in her voice, desperation mixed with anger, that made my stomach drop. When I called Jake to the door, his reaction told me everything I needed to know. He turned pale, like he'd seen a ghost. "Sarah," he whispered, "what are you doing here?" That's when my world started crashing down. Sarah, as it turned out, was Jake's ex-wife. The same ex-wife he told me he divorced 5 years ago because they'd grown apart. The same ex-wife he claimed he hadn't spoken to since the divorce. "Meet your daughter," she said, holding up the baby. "The one you've been paying me to keep quiet about for the past year." I felt like I was in some twisted nightmare. The baby had Jake's distinctive green eyes and the same dimple on her left cheek that I'd fallen in love with. There was no denying it, this was his child. Jake tried to shut the door, but Sarah stuck her foot in. "I'm done keeping your secret," she said. "Your wife deserves to know the truth. All of it." The truth, as it spilled out over the next excruciating hour in our perfectly decorated living room, the one I'd spent months getting just right, was far worse than anything I could have imagined in my darkest moments. Jake and Sarah had never actually divorced. They'd separated briefly 5 years ago during what Sarah called a rough patch, which is when he met me at the charity event. But they'd reconciled a few months later after couples counseling. However, instead of being honest and breaking things off with me, Jake made a calculated decision that would destroy multiple lives. He chose to maintain 2 separate lives, meticulously crafting elaborate lies to keep both relationships going. The level of deception was staggering. He'd created fake divorce papers to show me early in our relationship when I'd asked about his previous marriage. He'd manufactured an entire fictional timeline of his life before me, complete with fabricated stories about why he and Sarah had split up. Every detail had been carefully planned and executed, right down to the fake email trail of their supposed divorce proceedings that he'd shown me when I had questions. To Sarah, he was the hardworking husband whose job in international sales required frequent travel, weeks in Europe, conferences in Asia, business meetings across the country. He'd send her photos from hotels and airports, carefully staged to maintain the illusion. To me, he was the devoted boyfriend and eventually husband whose role as a regional director meant long hours and regular trips to oversee different offices. He'd call me from client meetings that were actually dinner with Sarah, or text me goodnight from a hotel room that was actually their bedroom. He'd been juggling both relationships for 5 years with the precision of a master choreographer. His supposed business trips were perfectly timed switches between homes, his calendar a masterpiece of deception with color-coded entries to keep track of which life he was living on any given day. He even maintained separate wardrobes, toiletries, and sets of keys, never risking a slip-up that might reveal his double life. When I found his second phone once, he convinced me it was a work device that he needed for international travel. Every question had a prepared answer, every potential hole in his story was carefully patched before it could become a crack in his facade. The baby happened during one of his work trips with Sarah. When she got pregnant, Jake panicked. He started paying her to keep quiet, promising he'd figure something out. But Sarah had finally had enough of being the secret wife. I sat there in our tastefully decorated living room, my legs gone numb, as Sarah pulled out document after document from a thick manila envelope. Each new piece of evidence was another nail in the coffin of my marriage, another stake through my heart. First came their marriage certificate, dated 3 years before I met him. The paper was worn at the edges, but the names were clear as day. Then bank statements showing their joint accounts, active and used regularly, including transactions from just last week when Jake had told me he was at a conference in Denver. The pictures were the worst, dozens of them, each one a fresh betrayal. There they were at a beach resort in Maui last summer, when he told me he was at a sales convention in Phoenix. Another showed them at Christmas with her family, taken during the week he'd said he was stuck in London due to weather delays. I'd spent that Christmas alone, watching Hallmark movies and missing him. Part 2. My husband's ex-wife showed up at our door claiming that she had his baby, then his double life started unraveling and now he is begging for reconciliation. The sonogram photos were the final blow, Jake grinning proudly next to Sarah in the examination room, his hand on her belly, dated during a week he'd claimed he was overseeing a major client project in Chicago. I'd even helped him pack for that trip. Jake didn't deny any of it. He just sat there, head in his hands, occasionally mumbling "I'm sorry" like that would fix anything. Update 1. The week after Sarah's revelation was more than just a blur, it was a waking nightmare. I moved out of our house that same night, throwing whatever I could grab into suitcases while Jake followed me around, alternating between crying and trying to explain. His words washed over me like static, meaningless sounds from a stranger wearing my husband's face. I couldn't stand looking at him, couldn't bear to sleep in what I now knew was just one of his beds. Each item I packed was a memory tainted, the matching pajamas we'd bought in Paris, had he bought similar ones for Sarah? The expensive watch I'd given him for our anniversary, had he worn it during Emma's birth? The photo albums of our wedding, how had he explained that week-long absence to Sarah? I ended up at my best friend Amy's apartment, collapsing on her couch at 3 a.m. with mascara streaked down my face and my wedding ring clutched in my fist. She didn't ask questions, just held me while I sobbed and made calls to cancel my Monday meetings. The next morning, she helped me start untangling the web of lies I'd been living in. The financial discoveries were like body blows, each one leaving me more winded than the last. Jake hadn't just been living 2 lives, he'd been systematically stealing from both of us to maintain his elaborate charade. The joint savings account we'd been putting money into for our future children? Nearly empty. The investment portfolio he'd shown me statements for? Jake. All the money I thought was going toward our future had been funneled to Sarah as hush money after she discovered her pregnancy. Meanwhile, he told Sarah their joint savings was going into a promising tech startup, when in reality, he'd used it for the down payment on our house. Both Sarah and I got restraining orders against him. We also both filed for divorce, though obviously only Sarah's would be valid since my marriage to Jake was never legal in the first place. The district attorney is now investigating him for fraud and bigamy. The most surreal part? Sarah and I actually started talking. At first, it was just to coordinate our legal strategies, but then we realized we were both victims of the same master manipulator. We'd both been played by a man we thought we knew. He told me you were his crazy ex who wouldn't accept the divorce, Sarah told me over coffee one day. Every time I saw a photo of you two together on social media, he'd say you were stalking him, photoshopping pictures to make it look like you were still together. I laughed bitterly. He told me you were his unstable ex who kept trying to sabotage his relationships. When I saw your name on his phone, he said you were threatening him. Update 2. It's been 2 months since my world exploded, and the revelations keep coming like aftershocks from an earthquake. Through our lawyers' investigations, Sarah and I discovered something that would have seemed impossible just weeks ago. Jake had a third girlfriend, Michelle, in Boston. She'd been dating him for 2 years, believing she was in a relationship with a grieving widower who'd lost his wife to cancer. He'd even shown her fake obituaries and old photos of Sarah, explaining that it was still too painful to keep pictures of his late wife in his phone. The level of planning that went into maintaining 3 separate lives was both impressive and terrifying. The police investigation revealed a spider's web of financial fraud that made our heads spin. He had 7 different credit cards none of us knew about, spread across 3 different names, his real one and 2 variations that were close enough to pass casual inspection. He'd racked up over $100,000 in debt, juggling balance transfers and minimum payments like a deranged accountant. The embezzlement from his company was even more elaborate. As a regional director, he had access to expense accounts and client billing. He'd created fake business trips, dummy consulting firms, and phony vendor contracts, siphoning off money to fund his triple life. For 5 years, he'd been falsifying reports, creating elaborate paper trails, and manipulating accounting records with a skill that left even the forensic accountants impressed. His organizational system for maintaining these separate lives was a masterpiece of deception. Different phones for different relationships, each one meticulously labeled and stored in his office safe. Separate email accounts with detailed folders keeping track of every lie, every story, every alibi. He even had different wardrobes at each house, with photos cataloging each outfit to ensure he never wore the same thing in the wrong location. The calendar system he'd created was like something out of a spy movie, color-coded events, detailed backstories, and alternate versions for each woman in his life. The company fired him when the embezzlement came to light. Now he's facing criminal charges, and both Sarah and I are named as witnesses in the case. The strangest part? Sarah and I have become friends. We've helped each other through the trauma and legal battles. We even started a support group for other victims of relationship fraud, and you'd be shocked how many stories similar to ours we've heard. Update 3. 6 months have passed, and life has taken turns I never could have predicted. Jake is in jail awaiting trial, his carefully constructed house of cards having finally collapsed around him. Michelle, his third girlfriend, continues to be instrumental in the prosecution's case. As a financial analyst herself, she kept detailed records of every investment Jake claimed to be making with her money. The fake documents he'd created to scam her out of her inheritance, nearly $200,000 from her grandmother, became crucial evidence in the fraud case against him. Looking at Emma, Sarah's daughter who's now 15 months old, is a bittersweet experience. She has Jake's eyes, that same vibrant green that made me fall in love with him, and his dimpled smile that I once thought was just for me. Sometimes when I watch her play, I feel an ache deep in my chest for the children I thought I'd have with Jake, the family we planned during late-night conversations that I now know were just another part of his performance. But mostly, I'm grateful that the truth came out before I had children with him, before I became permanently tied to his web of lies. Sarah and I made the difficult decision to sell both houses. It turned out Jake had taken out multiple mortgages on each property, using elaborate schemes to hide the additional loans from both of us. Part 3. My husband's ex-wife showed up at our door claiming that she had his baby, then his double life started unraveling and now he is begging for reconciliation. The houses were drowning in debt, just like everything else in Jake's life. But selling them felt like exorcising ghosts, letting go of the physical spaces where so many lies had lived. Sarah has found happiness with David, a kindergarten teacher at her school who looks at Emma like she's the most precious thing in the world. He comes to our support group meetings sometimes, wanting to understand what we've been through so he can better support Sarah. Watching them together, I see what real love looks like: honest, straightforward, no elaborate excuses or mysterious absences. The support group Sarah and I started has flourished beyond anything we could have imagined. What began as casual coffee meetings between two betrayed women has grown into a registered nonprofit with over 50 active members and chapters opening in 3 other cities. We've named it Truth After Betrayal, or TAP for short. Every week, we hear news stories of other master manipulators like Jake, men and women who construct elaborate double and triple lives, leaving behind a devastating trail of emotional and financial destruction. Some stories hit frighteningly close to home. There's Rebecca, whose husband maintained 3 separate families in different states for 12 years, only discovered when he had a heart attack and all 3 wives showed up at the same hospital. Or Michael, whose girlfriend of 8 years turned out to be married with 4 children, running an entire parallel life he knew nothing about. Each story in our group adds another piece to the puzzle of how these skilled manipulators operate, helping us all recognize the warning signs we missed in our own relationships. Last week, we were interviewed by a major news network about relationship fraud and the growing epidemic of digital deception. The producer, herself a survivor of a similar situation, said our story might help other people spot the warning signs before it's too late. The episode is set to air next month, and we hope it reaches others who might be trapped in their own versions of the nightmare I lived through. Update 4. 1 year later, and the woman I see in the mirror is finally someone I recognize again. The dark circles under my eyes have faded, and I've stopped flinching every time my phone rings. Jake was sentenced to 15 years in prison for a laundry list of charges: fraud, embezzlement, bigamy, and financial exploitation. The prosecutor said it was one of the most sophisticated cases of relationship fraud she'd ever seen. During the trial, we learned even more about the extent of his deception. He'd been living this way for most of his adult life, creating and discarding identities like worn-out clothes. Before Sarah and me, there had been 2 other women in his previous job, another elaborate scheme that fell apart when one of them discovered the truth. He'd simply moved to a new city, changed jobs, and started over with a fresh set of lies. He's tried to contact both Sarah and me from prison multiple times. The letters come every few weeks, each one thicker than the last, filled with what I imagine are explanations, apologies, or more likely, new lies. We return them unopened, marked return to sender in bold red ink. His words have no power over us anymore. The therapy and support group have helped me understand the psychological mechanics of what happened. Dr. Morris explained how master manipulators like Jake operate. They're emotional vampires, feeding off the trust and love of others, incapable of forming genuine connections. The person I thought I married never existed. He was just a carefully crafted character in Jake's ongoing performance. Sarah's wedding to David is next month, a small, intimate ceremony in her parents' garden. Emma, now almost 2 with her mother's laugh and her stepfather's gentle nature, will be the flower girl. I'm helping with the planning, and there's a beautiful irony in the fact that I'm now using my wedding planning spreadsheets and vendor contacts to help create a celebration of genuine love, not deception. As for my own love life, I'm dating again, but with the wisdom that comes from surviving betrayal. My new relationship with Chris, a civil engineer I met through my brother, moves at a pace that would have seemed glacial to my younger self. But there's something beautiful about the slow unfurling of trust, about taking the time to verify and validate before giving your heart away. I do background checks now, would have saved me a lot of trouble with Jake, and I'm not afraid to ask difficult questions or voice my concerns. Chris understands my need for transparency and meets it with patience and openness. He shares his location with me voluntarily, introduces me to his friends and family, and never makes me feel guilty for double-checking his stories. When he says he's working late, he sends me pictures of his desk covered in blueprints. When he goes out with friends, he adds me to their group chat. It's not about control or mistrust, it's about showing respect for my past experiences and helping me rebuild my capacity for trust. Our support group continues to evolve and grow. We've expanded our services to include financial counseling, legal advocacy, and even a partnership with a private investigation firm that offers reduced rates to our members. We're working with law enforcement to help them better understand and investigate these cases, pushing for stronger laws against relationship fraud, and developing educational programs for high schools and colleges about healthy relationships and red flags to watch for. Looking back, there were red flags I chose to ignore. The frequent business trips, the separate phone for work, how he never wanted me to surprise him at his office. But Jake was so convincing, so seemingly perfect in every other way, that questioning him felt wrong. If there's one thing I've learned from all this, it's that real love doesn't require secrets. A partner who truly loves you won't ask you to accept mysterious absences or unexplained behaviors. They won't have elaborate excuses for everything. Sometimes I wonder if Jake ever really loved either of us, or if we were just characters in the story he was telling himself. But I've stopped trying to understand him. Some people are just broken in ways we can't fix. Sarah and I joke now that Jake's greatest gift to us was each other. We've become best friends, and Emma has a loving aunt in me. We've turned our pain into purpose, helping others and sharing our story. Life has a funny way of working out sometimes. What seemed like the end of my world became the beginning of something meaningful. Yes, Jake shattered my trust and my heart, but he couldn't break my spirit. I'm stronger now, wiser, and surprisingly, happier than I've ever been. To anyone reading this who suspects their partner is living a double life, trust your gut. Don't ignore the red flags. And remember, you're not alone. There are people out there who understand what you're going through and want to help. And to Jake, if you ever read this, I forgive you, not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace. Your lies no longer have power over me.